Well, hello.
Hey, how are you?
Hot, sweaty, out of breath, running a little late. My apologies.
Yeah, well, we're beekeepers, so that's normal.
I mean, we are, but I didn't have to go look at the hive, 30 minutes before the recording was supposed to start.
Come on.
Um, I had this thought in my mind. I was like, crap, I was gonna do that like 3 or 4 days ago, but it was 99 and heat index is well over 100. So I was like, not going to do it. We had a cold front coming through this weekend. So I'll do it this weekend. And then yesterday, I spent all day trying to get the rest of the wire up on the chicken coop because we've been having raccoon palooza out here like every night.
Oh no.
And so then today at 30 minutes before we should have started, I was like, oh crap, I still got to go look at the top bar. I haven't done that. I got to make sure they're not cross combing, which they started.
Uh-huh. I
they,
saw your Instagram post with you get a full comb or almost a full. There was like two-thirds of a comb.
yeah, that was when they 4 days after putting them in the box when they started actually like
Oh, that's an
expanding
old
over.
post you're telling me.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, you're behind. I haven't but to your credit, I don't think I've posted much anything since then. So
No.
it's the most recent post I did, but it was
Yes.
from like 2, 3 weeks ago at this point.
Right.
Now we're up to 7 bars and
Oh,
they've got one little baby comb and it was so like they may still be expanding. But she had started moving the brood nest over into those combs and now they're backfilling those combs and she's moving the brood nest back towards the nuke box, which I'm like, grr. But that's okay, whatever. If they decide to not follow my plan, I can make it to where they can overwinter in both. It's fine.
you can also put a queen excluder between the Langstroth nuke box
I
and your
can.
tower hive.
I actually those came in on Tuesday. I ordered some plastic ones that I could cut to fit and
Mhm.
put in there. So I already have that concept in mind to do. But my
Right.
plan was I wanted, since how she was moving the brood nest that way, I was hoping that she would continue and then I would just stick it in place. But now she's got it divided 50-50 between the box and the first 2 or 3 bars and
Yeah.
the hive. So I'm like, well, fine. But otherwise they're doing good. But the combs on the outer, they were starting to get fatter and it was starting to make it to where they
Yeah.
were building the next comb at the back edge of the bar instead of in the middle of the bar. So I had to do a little bit of correcting and I had to shave off one and I had to like smush and bend one. And so,
Butter it up. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
that's why my, as planned 5 to 10 minute inspection was like 20 minutes of
Right.
manipulation and tweaking.
But in the grand scheme of things, that's only 20 minutes. It's not that bad, when
No,
you're
and
kind of,
that's 20 minutes in 2 weeks.
oh
That's
yeah.
that's not horrible. Um,
That's because you got a lot of nectar coming in.
yes, yeah, and I haven't fed them now for the past 2 weeks, and they're still backfilling. So I don't know what they're getting it out of. There's all kinds of strange things around here blooming that I've never seen before, so I don't know what they are.
The bees will
I,
find things.
so one of our listeners, Rachel from Australia, she's one of our
Yeah.
Aussie friends. She commented on one of the Patreon posts here recently, and she was like, so why don't you just go ahead and break down and have Dr. Leo on the show and he can tell you all about the forage in that area. And I was like,
Oh, because he's not too far, is he?
he's about 2 to 3 hours, 3 to 4 hours. I don't know where he's in mid Missouri, I think. So he's about 2.5, 3 hours away minimum for me.
Well,
Um,
yeah. That
so
might or might not relate to where you're at.
well, that's what I said. Some of the flowering plants will be in common, but the trees, even though we're all in the Ozarks, the trees transition. I have a lot of pine trees.
Altitude?
I
I
don't
don't know.
know. But I know that like, cause I used to live up in Kansas City. I was around Kansas City, Missouri and out in that area. And then several trips down to Lake of the Ozarks in Missouri and Branson and things like that. And the trees out there are not as much pine.
Fine.
You've got lots of trees that turn pretty colors. Down here, we have some of those interdispersed, but we've got a lot of pine. We're in it's a skinny pine. So they're the really tall ones that drop all the lower limbs and just have the stuff at the canopy where they're actually exposed to the sun. We got a lot of those. So it's kind of like in Central Texas, when you're heading out towards Bastrop, all of a sudden you hit this pine forest out of nowhere,
Yes.
so it's kind of like that.
Yeah, so I'm familiar with that because I have customers, or I had customers before I got overwhelmed closer to us. And I'm like, well, we're going to keep it closer to home.
Yeah, I understand that and start reeling it in. Like,
Right. As you get more and more customers, you bring them closer to you.
yeah. Have you ever had to participate in I don't know if it's USDA, but it's the agricultural survey that the government sends out. I've
The
had to
vehicle
participate.
partnership
Nope.
thing?
No. This is straight from the government.
Okay, no, yeah.
Yeah.
I don't think I have.
My papers are too far out of reach to grab them and say specifically what it is, but I've had to participate in, what are we doing? In 7 years of beekeeping, I've had to participate in 2 censuses for bees for agriculture.
Nice.
And I've had to participate in 2 surveys. One of them was a honey production survey last year, and the other one is a bee loss survey, kind of like the Bee Informed Partnership, but this is straight through the government. And I was like, it keeps track because I've done it before, so it knows what all was put in there before. So I had to make an explanation because it was like, last year was 50 some colonies, and then this year it's like, how many colonies did you have between April and June? And I was like, 2.
And then how many did you lose? 0.
Yeah, none.
Oh,
Right.
one,
And they're
one.
like, how did you go from 50 some to 2 and not lose any?
Sold them all.
Well, you see, in April, I had no colonies. And that's what it says, like, on April 1st, how many colonies did you have? And I was like, none. On June, how many did you have? 2.
Yeah, that probably skews their numbers quite a bit.
Yeah. So I had to put a little bit of explanation in there as to what had occurred. Well, anywho, what's been going on in your neck of the woods?
It finally rained, and we're really happy with that. And it's just kind of the bees are, they had a small dearth where they contracted and backfilled a little bit, but apparently they're brooding back up in several of our customer yards. And I'm just kind of like, they know something we don't. And sure enough, we got some rain, and I'm hoping that we're going to get more. There's a bunch of storms in the Gulf, right? So
yeah, could be.
Might not be that bad for them after all. It's
Might not be.
good. All my colonies are looking great. We've had basically, except for a few mistakes, like, one package install where the syrup leaked into the hive, and the bees basically piled onto the bottom and suffocated because they couldn't get out. Yeah, and a couple of other things, but none due to health. We have lost nothing due to health, and we're up to managing about 300 plus right now. So we're pretty happy with that.
Wow, that's pretty awesome.
Except for those packages in the spring, we have fed no bees either.
Very cool.
Mm-hmm.
That's awesome. Yeah. I hope that your rain and your cool front continues. Yeah, but it is relative. Just barely the beginning of July.
I think everything is relative.
Right. It's relative to this week, maybe just this day.
Yes. So what are we talking about tonight?
Well, we are talking about Australia. We'll boomerang back around there to my little comment about Rachel. And there's 2 things. One is a very interesting concept that I just kind of skimmed over accidentally. And then the other one is the more important one. So we'll start with the more important one. And this is something that honestly, I probably should talk about on the main episode. Like actually put out an independent main episode and maybe have a couple of our Australian beekeepers come on and chat about their fears or concerns.
Oh, yes.
But so in 2 other times, and I don't even know where my phone's at. So unfortunately, I cannot directly quote anything here. 2 other incidents in the past, many years ago, Australia has had a very close brush with the Varroa mite, where they have come into customs, but they were caught immediately and eradicated and kept Australia Varroa mite safe and free. But just this last week, dun dun dun, Varroa mites were found inside an inspection colony, a monitor hive, basically, where they have up around the port so that they can check for anything that may be coming in. And they did find Varroa mites there in New South Wales. Now, this is bad because this wasn't caught coming in. This was caught on a monitor hive that's already there. So they think that they have it caught. They think they have it quarantined, and they think they have it, quote unquote, eradicated. But there's a lot of communication going out to beekeepers in that region where colonies may have to be destroyed, and beekeepers are now in a panic. And it could be, unfortunately, it could be the beginning of the end for the last oasis where there were no Varroa mites.
Yeah, it sounds pretty terrifying for Australian beekeepers, and they're really going to, I think it's in where a little bit north of Sydney is that Newcastle port, where they discovered that they were some monitor hives that had caught on, and they can't tell if it's been imported or anything, like you said, because they're just sitting there, and just all of a sudden some mites appeared, and they're destroying all the mice, all of the hives in the radius.
Yep.
And some of those beekeepers are going to lose millions. Maybe not millions, but one guy was saying $250,000.
Yeah,
What would be his bill, and he's got no choice. They've got no choice.
no,
So.
no, it's kind of like in America, where if American foul brood is detected, everything must be burned and destroyed. And you have no choice. Bees, hives, equipment, tools, you name it, gone. And Australia has been the safe haven of not having any Varroa mite there for quite a while. And it's literally, if not the last, it is one of the last refuges, because the only other, like Iceland, okay, duh. Greenland, like, yeah, sure, they're not there. It's very cold. But
Right,
Australia
exactly.
is unfortunately, they were one of the places that weren't, and New Zealand was for a while, but then they came to New Zealand, and it caused quite a big downfall in beekeepers and the economy and agriculture and stuff there when it hit there. So Australia is bracing potentially for the worst, because once it's out there, it's such a tiny little thing. It's hard to know, whether or not it's spreading and where it's going and how long it's been there. Because if it truly just showed up and it just happens to be in one of these two little monitor hives, that's one thing. But if it showed up and it went to a couple of feral colonies, and then the feral colonies gave it to that hive, then you've got a bigger problem, because the spread has already begun in that instance. So it could be very devastating, unfortunately. And I definitely feel for the beekeepers that are under these restrictions, where they do have to go through and potentially destroy hives to stop the spread so that it doesn't reach the rest of the continent.
And that might show my ignorance, but I'm looking at a map of Australia, and I have no idea how those bees could have come through other than being imported.
Right.
Right. So what's going on with that? I thought they didn't allow imports of colonies of bees.
Well, they don't. Yeah, they don't, but it doesn't mean that the colony didn't hijack a ride, because that does happen a lot.
Oh, from a container, you mean?
Right. Yeah. Where they were either on the physical shipment or in a container, or, like part of the vehicle itself. Like there's all kinds of strange things. Bees like to get in odd places. So it could have been something along those lines, but it could have also been one of the previous instances where they had been detected and they thought they got them taken care of, and they didn't.
So I was reading an article, and there was Danny Lefebvre from the Australian Honeybee Industry Council that says that the mites that were detected in Queensland before, they were less threatening because they were more associated with the Asian honeybees, as opposed to the Varroa Destructor that's associated with the European honeybees. That's what they've discovered in those hives this time, which would be much more damaging.
Right.
They're talking about how this is just before the blueberry pollination happens, and pretty soon the almond pollinations will take place as well. So this could potentially have a far-reaching impact that goes beyond the beekeepers, but also affects the honey industry, which is still related to the beekeepers themselves, but also the food industry in Australia.
Right. Well, so hypothetically speaking, imagine if most of the colonies that were going to be doing the migratory pollination services were in a region that got quarantined. Even if they don't necessarily have the mites, if you're in a quarantined region and they say you cannot transport bees out of this region because we're in fear of quarantine, all of those colonies can now not participate in the pollination services. So
contracts are going to be lost, and
Right.
there's their livelihood, and then all that pollination as well. There's circuit breakers, just like for COVID, right?
Right.
We've got to stop the spread, and,
Right.
and that's what they're trying to do,
So
stop the technology.
to put this into perspective for non-Aussies on Patreon who are listening, in the United States, imagine if this happened in like December and they quarantined Florida and Texas. The agriculture system would grind to a screeching halt because all of the colonies that are getting ready to go to almonds in January are in Florida and Texas at that time of year. So if you quarantine the right region at the wrong time, bad things happen.
Well, and this kind of shows the magnifying factor of COVID too. We've all been hit with higher prices, disruptions of the supply chain, gas prices, all kinds of things, right? And now you throw things that could have been handled fairly well. It's always kind of a problem, but it can be mitigated. And all of a sudden, it's compounded, and any issue is that much more serious because those prices that were already high for the food and excuse me, transportation and the food industry, now they're going to skyrocket, right?
And
everybody's going to pay for it.
Sometimes, unfortunately, especially here in the United States, sometimes that happens out of fear and panic before the actual problem causes any issues. So that could be, that could be
notorious for this.
Right. That could be another issue. Hopefully Australia deals with that sort of thing way better than we do. But yeah, it is definitely a sad day in beekeeping news from that standpoint for certain. And one of the other aspects of it too, that's like, I don't know, it's kind of, well, it's disheartening really, because it's awesome that they never had that issue. And here on Patreon, we had went through and we had talked and done a couple of polls and stuff at one point about, did we want to do a dedicated series of just Varroa specific information? And it was kind of torn 1/3, 1/3, 1/3, but some people didn't care. A third of them thought, yes, it's awesome, we should totally do that. And a third of them were like, I don't live in a place where Varroa exists, so I don't really feel like this pertains to me. But some of the people in that same country responded and said, yeah, but it's gonna eventually happen. It's inevitable. It's been everywhere. We can only keep them out for so long. So yeah, I want the information because I feel like inevitably I'm gonna have to know, even though it's not here today. And that's actually, it's kind of a good mindset. It's that whole prepare for the worst and hope for the best, because we're doing the same thing with Tropalaelaps, with another mite out there that is even worse than Varroa. It's not here, but we know where it is, and we know that it's got very harmful tendencies. So we're already starting to observe it and learn from it and, do the research on it so that when it does arrive, hopefully we can put up a better front.
Well, there's a silver lining, right? I mean, it is the winter kind of season still, and that kind of provides them with a much slower spread so they can intervene much more efficiently. There's also the fact that they've seen the rest of the world struggle with the Varroa mites, and they've been able to educate themselves. There's been programs teaching beekeepers in Australia how to detect and monitor for the mites. They're on the lookout, basically, and they've been educated. They also are benefiting beyond the warning signs. They're benefiting from the research that's been done on how to eradicate or control Varroa mites in other countries, what works, what doesn't, potentially even up to chemical intervention, which I am not a proponent of. But if you look at it also, the way of the US, the way it worked out, a lot of people did lose a lot of colonies of honeybees. I think it was 30% across the United States.
For here, it was worse in New Zealand. They lost way more than the United States did.
Well, I think they lost even up to 90% of their feral population, which we probably did in the feral population as well. But in the commercial or managed colonies, I think it was about 30%. And I don't know, in New Zealand was, like you said, probably higher. I have no idea how much that was. But the point is that, what happened is that you had some beekeepers that decided to go and choose the evolution path or the survival path. And yes, they did lose basically hundreds and thousands of colonies, but what they were left with was resilient strains that they were able to propagate. And they're now a huge success story. And just basically sell out every year of their bees, and they're contributing to the repopulation of the colonies of honeybees with resilient strains, and they're contributing to the research as well. So there is positive aspects to that. A lot of the wisdom out there has been that had we not chosen the chemical pathway 30 years ago and instead took the hard pill and suffer from it for a couple, 3 years, our bees would be way beyond the Varroa Destructor, and there would be no need to treat anything at this point, right? Because they would have developed resiliency and survival, capabilities, and how to mitigate the presence of the varroa, the ankle biters, the groomings, the capping, uncapping, all that stuff would have been sped up, basically.
Yeah. Now, one of the other things, unfortunately, that speeds up when you introduce Varroa into a new ecosystem is going to be mutations of already existing diseases and viruses and stuff that's out there. So one of the great case studies that we were able to witness was Hawaii, because in Hawaii, we have documented records predating Varroa, and then we have the records of when it hit, what happened, and then after the fact. And it just so happened they were doing research and studying on the island of things such as deformed wing virus. And what they found was that when before Varroa shown up, there were 3 to 5 strains of deformed wing virus. None of them were deadly. None of them actually would kill a colony. The colonies had kind of managed to evolve along with it, and it was a hindrance, but that was about it. And after Varroa showed up, there was one mutated strain of deformed wing virus that became predominant and outcompeted all of the other strains to the point where that was the number one thing they found. And when it mutated to do that, it became deadly to the colonies. So it is a nasty, evil little red parasite. It can cause some issues for sure, outside of just the normal, it's transmitting these diseases and making the bees sick. But in the process of doing that, it's allowing the diseases themselves to mutate and evolve. And so everything has to grow and learn at that point.
Well, and it's always an arms race between the parasites and the hosts, and what really is in the interest of the parasite is and the host as well, is to reach a balance. And this is where survival versus resistance is going to be, tolerance versus resistance is going to be favoring the health of the honeybee, right? You want them to be able to live in conjunction with those viruses, even in high titers of those viruses, but yet thrive and act like there's nothing wrong with it. And that disease might not express itself, even though there's a high level of the virus in the colony. So, again, that's using the evolution and survival of the colonies is what's going to promote tolerance versus resiliency, which is resistance, which is, kind of decreasing the number of mites in the population of bees, the levels of the mites themselves and the viruses that they're transmitting.
So, moral of the story, Australia, if you haven't done your homework, go out there and start doing some reading on Varroa mites. And you know what? Even though you may be in a part of the country that hopefully at the moment is safe from even the potential issue of it, it might not hurt to kind of brush up on some of the how to actually test for mites and do a mite count and have that information handy. Yeah.
What are the symptoms? What's the life cycle of the Varroa mites? And remember that the beekeepers tend to want larger populations so that they can produce more honey. And so they prevent brood breaks. They like to constantly either feed or promote population of bees into their colonies. Remember that when you do that, you're offering more opportunities for the mites to reproduce and multiply. If you let the colonies follow the natural cycles of weather and forage, where they come across brood breaks during the dearth, then you give them an opportunity to use that cleansing cycle to decrease the populations of Varroa mites. And it's something to keep in mind, right? Food for thoughts.
That's right. And if you want to start practicing actually doing mite checks and mite counts, you can use the sugar shake method, which will not kill your bees. It will not harm the bees, but it will give you an idea of how to do the process. And also, heaven forbid, lets you know if your colony might actually be one that was exposed and has anything in it. So if you happen to be around that New South Wales area, might not hurt to go out there and do that. Just to know, better safe than sorry. Knowledge is power, and being forewarned is the best. And my phone over there is ringing.
Oh, you found your phone.
No, it's a different phone. That's the computer phone. I don't know why it's ringing at 7 o'clock at night, but I'm not going to answer it.
Had you said nothing, we would have heard it. I barely heard it.
Well, luckily it stopped. And I think, I don't know, actually with the mic, since it's straightforward as far as what it picks up, unidirectional instead of omnidirectional.
Yeah.
The phone's far enough away. I don't know if I was talking. If I wasn't talking, it might not have picked it up, but sometimes it does. I'll see if there's like a clink or a thud somewhere. I'll see the little sound bar spike and register for a second on the mic. So we shall see. But anyhow, so there's the scary news. Sorry, everybody. Don't have nightmares.
It's better to be warned and just on the lookout than being caught off guard.
Yes, absolutely. So to end on a happier note, you hear us talk often about beekeeping can help with things, especially like PTSD. And I've mentioned before that beekeeping also helps with people that have any type of mental handicaps or disabilities. And now there was a story that also came out of Australia, so I thought this was fitting. A young gentleman by the name of Logan, I believe, and again, phone's not here, so I can't verify that, had dyslexia and had trouble in school, was struggling, and his teachers were trying to find a way to get him to engage and connect. And it coincidentally came to be found that he had a huge interest in honeybees. His teacher knew that he loved nature and loved the outdoors and things like that. She tried to use the dog that he had just gotten at one point as a means to kind of get that communication going and find common ground. But she mentioned in passing one day that she had a colony of bees, and he just lit up. And he loved honeybees and was fascinated with them, to the point that year for Christmas, he asked his folks if they could get him some hives. And so he started off with 2 colonies, and he is now 14. It is 2 years later. And that young child has 45 colonies now of bees. So that aspect of it almost sounds a little bit like Blake Shook to me. started off with a small handful, and then within a couple of years had like an outrageous amount of bees. But he is managing them. He's not even old enough to drive, so his parents shuttle him around and take him to the different bee yards that he has that are spread amongst friends and family in the small little community that he lives in. The community itself is only about 8,000 people, I think. So it's not a very big place. And
I'm just looking at the fact that he's also a business guy. He's smart. He is
now.
Rent a hive kind
That's right. He started doing pollination services where he will take his bees to farms, and he charges per hive to do so, and will help pollinate crops and stuff. So yeah, smart little guy, just needed to find that little thing that sparked his interest and got him engaged. And dyslexia is something that can be a pain in the butt. And I was diagnosed with that when I was younger in grade school. And I ended up kind of figuring out on my own accord how to counteract it, right? Like circumvent it. So reading was a little bit of a challenge, and I definitely didn't like reading out loud. And you'll still hear me sometimes when I do start to read something. If I haven't pre-read it a couple of times, it's not going to come out very smooth. I might stumble over stuff because my eyes and my brain will jump 3 or 4 words ahead and switch them and move them. And one of the young kids that we actually fostered at one point, he was dyslexic, and his was really bad. His would take like every other letter and just mix it all up. And so he had a lot of trouble going through and doing that. But with me, one of the things, like with math, with numbers, there's a little voice in my head that if I read the number, the voice in my head that reads it wrong. And I've learned to know that that specific voice in that instance is a liar. So if I look at a number and I say it's 761, the voice in my head will be like, no, it was 716. And I'm like, no, it wasn't. And I'll go back and double check. And so I've kind of learned how to manipulate that for myself and make it work. But there's new research out there that is actually showing that dyslexia, even though it has been touted as such a learning disability and causing problems from that aspect, they're only looking at things like reading and mathematics. But when they started taking but when they started taking other things into context, they found that people that have that issue excel in the natural environment with being able to find clues, pick up on traits, and follow patterns way quicker and easier than somebody who does not have dyslexia. So it's a survival trait that benefits other aspects of your life, maybe not just necessarily reading or math. So kudos to young Logan, who found bees, and it's helping him to come out of his shell and evolve. And it sounds like he has the same problem that most beekeepers do. In his instance, he isn't a very talkative individual, but if you get him talking about bees, he won't quit.
Yeah, that's funny.
So it's kind of like my shirt. Yeah. I hear what you're saying, but I just really want to talk about bees.
All I want to talk about is bees. Yes, right.
So shout out to Logan. That is awesome. If anybody out here on Patreon happens to know the young individual, definitely let him know that we think that he's awesome and he should listen to the podcast.
That's right. Congratulations, Logan, on being a successful beekeeper and on growing so fast.
Yeah, careful with that one. It's a slippery slope.
No, well, you can tell he's already addicted. He's already hooked. So
yeah, 14 and 45 hives. So yeah, he's gonna do good.
Yeah.
So, well, I think we will end on the happy note as opposed to any other news that is not so happy. So hopefully, again, take it as a forewarning. Alarm bells are going off in certain regions of Australia for very good reasons. So brace yourselves. It could be rough next year, especially if things don't get contained and under control. But do the research, do the reading, and do your homework and be prepared, because being prepared is really most of the battle when some things like that occur.
Right.
So there you go, everybody. Thank you for tuning in. We hope you enjoyed, and we look forward to talking to you again next week. But until then, as always, be good.
And be mindful.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
This Hive Jive production was made possible by amazing patrons like you, and we appreciate your support. To all our Hive Jive junkies out there, you truly are the bee's knees.